Since 1934, Iowa's farmers have turned to the Iowa Farm Bureau spokesman as their trusted news source. Now, the Spokesman Speaks. Listen in and hear from leading experts on topics important to farmers and agriculture. Now, here's your host.
Welcome to our August 9th edition of the Spokesman Speaks podcast. I'm Andrew Wheeler, and today we're reflecting on the year that's passed since the Derecho storm that tore through Iowa and 7 other Midwestern states with straight-line winds that reached 140 miles per hour back on August 10th of 2020. All told, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration estimates that last summer's derecho produced $11.5 billion in damage, the most costly thunderstorm in U.S. history. According to the American Farm Bureau, the derecho produced nearly $491 million in damage to corn, soybeans, and other crops in Iowa alone. And of course, those are the crop losses just here in Iowa. One under-the-radar loss to Iowa's landscape was its trees, including trees that provide aesthetic, environmental, and cost-saving benefits for Iowa's livestock farms. Seeing that need, the Coalition to Support Iowa's Farmers stepped up with a grant program to help livestock farmers impacted by the storm. For more on that, spokesman reporter Corey Munson chats with the Coalition's executive director, Brian Waddingham.
One of the success stories out of the terrible events was the Derecho Windbreak program, which helped livestock operators replace trees destroyed by the storm. Can you remind us of how this program came to be and tell us how things went?
Well, the Derecho Windbreak grant program came about due to Tim Bardole. He is a hog and livestock producer from Greene County, and he had this idea that farmers needed help replacing and repairing windbreaks that were damaged in the derecho because most insurance packages do not have a replacement value for trees. So Tim also sat on the Iowa Soybean Association board, and the Iowa Soybean Association reached out to me to talk about some opportunities and ways that we could perhaps help livestock farmers that were impacted by the derecho. So that's kind of what started everything in August. It took a while to get things put together, but when we felt we were ready, we rolled out the program in December, and that's how the CSIF Windbreak Derecho Grant Program came to be.
Are there any specific examples of where you looked at a situation and thought, this is why the program really is vital to Iowa farmers?
Yes, once we started going out to livestock farms, we noticed right away that open feedlot operators were hit the hardest. The open feedlots really relied on those windbreaks to provide protection from the northwest winter winds, also helped with controlling snow deposition so snow didn't pile up in the feed bunks or in the alleyways. So immediately we saw how big of an impact the loss of trees was having on livestock farms, especially on cattle farms. But also we observed several hog farms that lost trees, windbreaks that had been used as part of the Master Matrix program, where livestock farmers took points for those trees. So it was very important to get those trees replaced right away.
And I know you've kind of already hit on this, but when a livestock producer is looking at his or her operation, what's the value of having these windbreaks there?
You know, that's a really good question, because every farmer is a little bit different in what they value most about those windbreaks, but some real benefits would be odor control, snow deposition control, just improving the general aesthetics of the farmstead. Also saving labor and time moving snow off roofs or digging out pit fans. And one of the other benefits that we've seen is just an energy savings. Trees that were planted on the north and the west sides of hog barns, we've noticed a significant reduction in the amount of LP that it takes to keep those barns warm in the winter versus barns that don't have windbreaks. So those trees can quickly pay for themselves if you're saving money and time moving snow, saving on LP, and then also just generally improving neighbor relations it's really hard to put a value on that. But I know, and we know, that neighbors really appreciate farmers that plant trees around those livestock barns.
So when you were approached with the idea of this program last year, how did you see it fitting into CSIF's overall mission?
Well, one of the great things about the CSIF Derecho Windbreak Grant Program was that it was a natural fit for our Green Farmstead Partner Program. The Green Farmstead Partner Program has been around since 2009, and since that time we've planted more than 77,000 trees on livestock farms all across Iowa. So we knew that there was a real need out there because livestock farmers have dealt with so much in 2020. It was a pandemic year. There was depressed commodity prices. And then to have that derecho come through right before harvest just was another thing that farmers didn't need to deal with. So we were glad to help out in any way we could. And we're so fortunate that the Derecho Windbreak Grant Program tied in so well with the Green Farmstead Partner Program and allowed us to get out there on farms and get those windbreaks rebuilt and replaced in a timely manner.
What lessons did you and CSIF take away from this experience?
I think one thing that the coalition took away from the derecho was that, and this also applies to a lot of other livestock farmers, is the number of calls that we have received this past spring and summer and still are receiving today from farmers that didn't have windbreaks. We know that they typically receive more damage to their barns, their open feedlots, their homes, their grain bins because they didn't have a windbreak planted. They saw that their neighbors who had a windbreak planted didn't receive near the damage to structures. So they're now calling, wanting us to come out, work with them to put windbreaks in. And so our phones have been really busy. The Green Farmstead Partner calls have led the way this whole summer, which is surprising because we're in the midst of a drought through most of the state, but yet there is a real benefit to planting trees. And I think livestock farmers are really seeing that, a few $1,000s in a well-planned, well-placed windbreak can go a long way in saving you money down the road. So that was one of the things we learned, and we're very happy to continue to work with livestock farmers to get those windbreaks planted. And we have a nursery network of 30 professionals that travel the entire state of Iowa to get out and make sure those windbreaks are designed properly and located in the right place for farmers.
More generally, a year on from the derecho, how do you think on-farm recovery is going, and what still needs to be done out there in farm country?
I think, looking back, coming up on almost a year now since the derecho, we've got about half of the trees replanted. Again, dealing with a drought this year has been a challenge. Some farmers are opting to wait until fall. Hopefully we're going to catch a few more rains and they'll get those trees planted this fall. We also experience a little bit of a tree shortage. So if a farmer wanted a particular size of tree or species of tree, they may not have been available. So they had to adjust accordingly and get something else, or they decided to wait. But I think overall, the trees that we've gotten replanted with farmers that have received grant dollars have been thrilled. They're very thankful for that program. And again, trees was something a lot of us take for granted, but if insurance doesn't cover them, that's an all out-of-pocket expense for that farmer. And with the challenges that we've had here recently, every little bit of financial aid really helps these livestock farmers out.
Thanks for sharing, Brian. Iowa's derecho recovery is certainly ongoing, and we thought you'd all appreciate an update on one relief program that's making a real visible difference. All right, up next is a duo that recently took home Iowa's top honor for conservation. Ken Fawcett and his nephew, Kent Stuart, farm near West Branch, Iowa, and they were recently named the recipients of Iowa's 2021 Conservation Farmer of the Year Award. I had a chance to meet with Kent and Ken on their farm late last month and got a first-hand look at the successful conservation practices that are improving water quality and soil health here in Iowa. So let's head out east to Cedar County with Iowa's Conservation Farmers of the Year, Ken Fawcett and Kent Stuart. Kent, first of all, congratulations on winning the Iowa Conservation Farmer of the Year. It's a tremendous recognition and an honor for you, I'm sure. So tell me a little bit about what winning this award and being recognized as Iowa's Conservation Farmer of the Year means to you.
Well, there's a lot of deserving farmers in the state of Iowa, and a lot of good practices that people across the state are practicing. It's just an honor to be chosen to represent all the conservation farmers in the state and to have an opportunity to show and describe the practices that we've found to be very effective. And we're just very thrilled with the recognition.
And Kent, what are your thoughts?
I agree. It's there's a lot of different practices people do, and what we find works on our ground may not work for the neighbor, but that's okay. We each learn from each other's and mistakes and examples. So again, it's just honored to be chosen for it because there are a lot of deserving people out there.
And I know you've shared quite a bit over the course of the last 50 years, some of the conservation practices you've done on the farm. Just touch on a couple of the highlights of what you've done over the years, what's worked, what hasn't, and maybe what your thoughts are moving forward.
Well, we've held field days here to highlight different practices we've done. We have a riparian buffer strip down along a creek that was a cattle pasture. We've done contour buffer strips, prairie grass, pollinator strips, and these are things that we like to bring other farmers and neighbors in to show so that as they're driving by and they see these things, they get a better understanding. And like I mentioned before, you always learn something from everybody, so they'll ask a question and we'll take something away from it. So we've done many different practices, and we just enjoy sharing it with neighbors and showing them what we've found that works best for us.
And Ken, as you reflect back on your history farming, what are some of your key takeaways from conservation practices that you've incorporated here on the farm?
Well, when I came back to farm in 1971, I was from a traditional farming family, although they did conservation practices and had crop rotations, but the typical tillage procedure back then was a moldboard plow. So one of the first things I helped instigate was chisel plowing, minimum tillage, planting in a lot of crop residue, and that soon became no-till, first planting into hay ground, into alfalfa, later into soybean stubble, and then the jump into no-tilling into corn. And it's been very, very satisfying to see the changes through those years and how much more protection is afforded the soil and how much better the soil is to be able to not only save it but increase the carbon in the soil. I learned from conservation farmers when I started, was very much a novice, and right close to us was a very avid conservationist, and learned a lot from him. And I hope we can help others learn from our success and our failures too.
And I know that's one of the things that earned you this award this year is hosting tours, sharing what you're doing on the farm, and being an example for others. So as you share your success and even some things that might not work as well as you'd hoped with other farmers, what are some of the questions that they ask when they want to learn from you and hear about your experiences?
Well, I think a lot of people are apprehensive of different practices and how it's going to affect their commercial side of their business, because we all are here to grow more corn, grow more beans, be more profitable at it. We can demonstrate, how a contour buffer strip can go through the middle of a field, and you can have good weed control. You can do it successfully, and when they see it firsthand, I think it helps bring it home that, you're not going to have a weedy mess there. It's not going to be really detrimental to your corn or soybean crop that's next to it, and that's very satisfying to make that connection to people, to say, it is possible, and it's just a different way of doing things.
You mentioned challenges and obstacles to conservation, and one of those, as farmers know, is the relationship with the landlord, or if there's other partners involved in the farm, having everybody get on the same page and being in agreement. Tell us a little bit about your family dynamic and how you make it work for your family.
Well, we're fortunate. We have a very close family, and physically we're separated by a lot of distance, but we have good conversations. Ken and I are very open and honest with them about what we're trying to do, and we get a lot of buy-in from them, and they're interested because it's their family heritage as well. Even though Ken and I are doing the implementation of it, they enjoy seeing what we're doing, and it's just, like I said, good open communication and letting them know when it's not working. And they buy in real well. And, we have a lot of family members that maybe aren't actively farming, and yet they still are involved in agriculture and different aspects of it. We kind of rely on them for some of their information. They look to see what we're doing, and it, two-way street that way as well. So you just have to have good open communication about what you're doing and give them examples of where it's going to be at. And communication is the key. And with landlords as well that aren't relatives, you just have to talk to them about it. And they're wanting to save the soil for themselves because that's their asset. So we try and help them do that. And, hopefully they can reward us by, keeping the ground another year and keeping the rents in a reasonable rate. And I hope they appreciate what we're doing.
Ken, you've been involved in conservation for many years, as we've discussed. Where did your passion for the land and environmental stewardship start?
I vividly remember just a few hundred yards from here, after a heavy rainstorm, looking at the crop ground. This would be in the early 60s, maybe late 50s. And a rainstorm had just come through, and the dark black soil was washed away, and it washed away the seed, and it just devastated me to see all that hard work just be erased away. And back in those days, there was no other way besides full tillage to control weeds and pests. And my dad always said, although I don't think he practiced it, but he said, well, the sign of a good farmer is to not have a single stalk on top of the ground, to have it perfectly black. And I guess it became very apparent to me that wasn't how I wanted to farm. And we started doing practices to save the soil, and I think very successfully. I think we still aren't where we want to be, but by cover crops and planting into crop residue and keeping as much of the soil covered completely as possible is a real asset, a real benefit of conservation.
And those are certainly visual examples that you can see of conservation in practice, and you've shared a few others. How are you able to tell, other than just the obvious visuals, how are you able to tell if a conservation practice is successful on your farm and accomplishing what you're hoping that it was designed to accomplish?
Well, there's many ways that are non-visual like that, and one of them, of course, is using soil testing and seeing the organic matter of the soil not decrease, yet increase as we're building that up. Testing for nitrates, things like that go into the water, that's vitally important to us because we're the first ones to drink the water. We have springs around here that we certainly don't want excess nitrates in. So those are some tools we use to measure that aspect of it. Just testing like that can keep track of how it's doing.
And with your conservation plan on the farm, it's very comprehensive. You have a lot of different things going on. You're very forward-looking about incorporating new things. I guess to summarize, how would you describe your farming philosophy here on the farm?
We just left a gathering with family members, kids, grandkids. That's the philosophy. Is we want a farm to be here that's healthy for them. We want it to provide, an income if they choose to farm, but we just want them to appreciate the land the way we do, and I think we're doing a good job of that, showing them what's possible and, how we're doing it, and hopefully they can take what we've done and said, hey, we can do even better, and that'd be great, very satisfying for us if that was the case.
And Ken, what's your outlook on farming philosophy and embracing conservation?
I think the technology that has come about in the last 40 years is going to benefit conservation. I think the assets it's going to show is by knowing what each acre is doing, by knowing how we need to treat each acre, we can tailor the practices to the soil better, and we can put the crops on those areas that are most productive. We can find areas that aren't and use some of the benefits of conservation programs, CRP, and other things that is shown are beneficial and are desired by the public. So I think technology with farming, not just field by field, but acre by acre, can help diversify agriculture. It can help make a healthier agriculture. And I embrace the technology. I just couldn't believe that we could have a prairie pollinator strip wind through our field in every direction for about a mile, and that we could spray our herbicides right next to it, and we could not damage any of the flowers. It's just amazing to me that those two things are compatible, a field of prairie flowers and a field of soybeans. It's remarkable, and I wish every farmer could see that.
Ken mentioned the technology part of it, and that's what has really helped as well. When we're talking about planting into no-till, planting into cover crops, it's a totally different planting environment. And with the improvements they've made in planter controls, down pressure, these are things that you have to have right to be successful. And we certainly have the technology in place now that lets us do that. It varies the ground pressure, seeding depth, seeding rate as we go through the field, and it's critical to be able to do that as we vary the type of tillage practice we use, going from no-till corn stalks, no-till beans, cover crops. It's very important to have the technology behind it.
And in closing, for folks in Iowa, Iowans are obviously very concerned about water quality and soil health. For those who might not be aware of the great conservation practices going on across the state, or be aware of the Conservation Award winners and farmers like yourselves who are taking on this challenge, what would you say to them to make them feel good about the conservation progress we're making here in the state?
Well, I would say that it is a statewide effort, and as I mentioned before, farms are different, so there's not going to be one practice that you can prescribe for everybody. The Iowa approach is that let's throw out a whole lot of different practices. Let's see what works on what ground. And it is the goal of every farmer we know, and certainly ours as well, that we do reduce the amount of runoff, because that's what carries your nutrients and your chemical loss. So it's just important to us to be able to try different things on our terms rather than having the government dictate what we have to do, because, as I mentioned, it's not going to work the same here as it does western Iowa, southern Iowa, wherever. So pretty happy with the approach Iowa's taken, that, hey, let's throw out a lot of projects, let's see what works and track it. My message to the non-farming public is that we do care, and we are making efforts. We work hard to take care of the land, which in turn takes care of the runoff and everything else.
Well, I think people in Iowa need to understand that Iowa is a unique place. It is a whole state full of the most productive land in the whole world. We won't ever look like Colorado or Utah because we have rich, dark, fertile soil. And so our land is more subtle, but it's much more productive. And it's the job of Iowa farmers to protect those resources, to keep the nutrients where they should be, to keep the plants where they should be. And through our, the efforts of the NRCS and the state of Iowa and the national efforts to promote conservation, I think farmers embracing this new emphasis and using technology are going to be able to make a positive difference in the environment and at the same time provide enough food for the whole world to enjoy, and I think to help teach other people the benefits of conservation. I think the whole world is watching what agriculture is doing, and I think it's time that we show what kind of performance we can achieve.
We talk a lot about how conservation is more than just something farmers do on their farm. It builds a lasting legacy, and that's clearly the case here. Congratulations again to Ken and Kent, and to all of the farm families out there who are building a conservation legacy of their own on their family farm. All right, we're near the end of this episode of the Spokesman Speaks podcast, but just one more thing before you go. Later this week, we'll welcome the much-anticipated return of the Iowa State Fair and Farm Bureau Park. So if you're headed out to the fair August 12th through 22nd, please be sure to come out and see us. We're located just east of the Varied Industries building, and we're giving away some great prizes like a Traeger grill, a Fairway meat package, $500 in groceries, and even more. We hope to see you out there during the fair. That's all for this episode of the Spokesman Speaks. I hope you enjoyed it and that you'll join us for the next one on August 23rd. Thank you for doing the work that inspires everything we do here at the Iowa Farm Bureau. And thanks for listening to the Spokesman Speaks.
Thank you for listening to the Spokesman Speaks, a podcast by Iowa Farm Bureau. Check out more podcast episodes at iowafarmbureau.com/podcast. You can also find and subscribe to the Spokesman Speaks podcast in the Apple Podcasts app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and other popular podcast apps. We appreciate your ratings and reviews, and we welcome you to email us your feedback at podcast@ifbf.org.